Look closely at how we live today, from corporate boardrooms instituting mandatory mindfulness training to millions of people plugging into daily meditation apps on their morning commutes. Modern society has a massive appetite for the teachings of the Buddha. Today, we carve out moments of absolute stillness to cope with the non-stop chaos of the 21st century. This bar chart shows global religious census data from 2010 to 2020, and it reveals a massive anomaly. While other major belief systems continue to grow, the global Buddhist population actually shrunk by roughly 5%, dropping to 324 million people. It is the sole major world religion currently on a downward trajectory. We are left with a statistical paradox. The core practices of Buddhism have integrated deeply into global daily life, achieving a cultural footprint larger than ever before, yet the official count of its followers is steadily dropping. To solve this mystery, we need to look at how we measure belief. Counting Buddhists on a census form assumes there is a single, static definition of what it means to be one. But in reality, the very identity of the Buddha's followers has been mutating, fracturing, and rebuilding itself for 2.5 millennia. The starting point for this movement lies here, among these ancient brick ruins in Lumbini, near present-day Nepal. Between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, the Indian subcontinent was undergoing rapid social and urban transformation, prompting a wave of intense philosophical questioning. The early practitioners in this region did not use the English word Buddhist, a term invented by 19th century scholars. They identified themselves as shramanas, meaning ascetics or seekers. They were people deliberately stepping away from the strict, hierarchical, ritual-heavy traditions of the time to seek ethical and mental clarity. Notice the clear separation of the people in this vintage photograph. Almost immediately, the community divided into two distinct paths: the ordained monastic community, known as the Sangha, and the everyday lay householders. The monks and nuns, the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, took strict vows, observed a rigid monastic code, and dedicated their lives to preserving the teachings. In return, the lay followers, the upasakas and upasikas, supported the monastics with donations of food and shelter, while applying the ethical precepts to their ordinary family and work lives. This dual identity system was incredibly effective. A dedicated core preserved the exact philosophy, while an adaptable outer ring of lay people integrated those ideas into daily commerce and family life. It allowed the teachings to survive locally and eventually mobilize across the entirety of Asia. As merchants and monks carried these teachings outward along major trade routes, the philosophy encountered wildly different cultures. It absorbed local beliefs, local languages, and local politics, fracturing into three highly distinct regional traditions. In Southeast Asian nations like Thailand, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka, the Theravada tradition took hold. Here, religious identity became closely tied to national identity. Kings and governments actively patronized the monasteries, emphasizing the original ancient texts and a highly disciplined monastic life. Moving north into China, Japan, and Korea, the Mahayana tradition emerged. The teachings syncretized heavily with existing Taoist and Confucian philosophies. The practice here became deeply community-driven, prioritizing compassion for all beings, honoring ancestors, and gathering for massive, community-wide festivals. And up in Tibet and the Himalayas, the Vajrayana tradition developed. This iteration embraced complex esoteric rituals and deep cultural integration. As you can see in this gathering before the Potala Palace, religious adherence became inextricably linked with the region's political and cultural identity. As these traditions matured and settled into distinct regions, the label of Buddhist came to represent vastly different lives, stretching to an ascetic monk, a Japanese festival-goer, or a Tibetan political exile. The global spread of these teachings was not driven solely by peaceful cultural exchange along trade routes. Severe political pressure and violence repeatedly forced the community to uproot and adapt. These red brick ruins in India belong to Nalanda, once a massive, thriving university and center of Buddhist learning. Starting around the 12th century, invasions by foreign rulers systematically sacked and burned these intellectual hubs, causing a sharp, violent decline of the religion in its own birthplace, forcing surviving scholars to flee. That pattern of forced migration continued into the 20th century. The Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia systematically targeted monasteries and banned religious practice, while the Chinese invasion of Tibet destroyed institutions and pushed an entire generation of practitioners into a global diaspora. Decades of intense persecution forced the community out of localized strongholds. They had to learn how to practice in exile, without the backing of state governments or ancient temples, forging a highly resilient, globally scattered network primed to engage with the modern West. This brings us back to our shrinking census numbers. The first reason the official count is dropping is purely demographic. The traditional strongholds of Buddhism in East Asia, countries like Japan and China, are currently navigating rapidly aging populations and very low fertility rates. Alongside these demographic shifts, a second driver for the statistical decline has emerged: religious disaffiliation. In the 20th century, exiled leaders and prominent teachers brought Buddhist philosophy to the global stage, presenting it less as rigid dogma and more as an open investigation into the mind. On one side is formal religious adherence, following vows and rituals. On the other is secular mindfulness practice, utilizing meditation and psychology. Once heavily overlapped, today that middle section is shrinking. Massive numbers of practitioners are situating themselves entirely within the secular sphere. Millions of people actively structure their lives around the Buddha's teachings on compassion, impermanence, and mindfulness. But when the census taker asks for their religion, they simply check none, because they view their practice as a secular lifestyle, a tool for mental health, or a philosophical framework. The official shrinking demographic is an illusion of measurement. The movement is shifting into forms that evade traditional categorization. From ascetic wanderers in ancient India, to the massive institutional networks of Asian empires, to the individual practitioner opening a meditation app on a crowded subway, the definition of the practitioner has never stopped shifting. This 2,500-year evolution of the identity is the ultimate real-world demonstration of the Buddha's most fundamental teaching: impermanence.